Sunday Baroque Conversations is made possible by the Friends of Sunday Baroque and is produced at WSHU Public Radio in Fairfield, Connecticut. I'm Suzanne Bona. Thank you for listening. Don't miss an episode of Sunday Baroque Conversations. Subscribe on Apple, Google, or wherever you get your podcasts. And please leave us a review. If you want to find out where you can listen to our weekly show, visit our website, sundaybaroque.org, for a station list and our 24/7 stream. Again, that's sundaybaroque.org. Flutist Brandon Patrick George is a Grammy-nominated chamber musician with a repertoire that extends from the Baroque era right up to cutting-edge contemporary music. He is the flutist of Imani Winds. He's appeared as a soloist with numerous orchestras, and he's also on the faculty of the Curtis Institute and the Banff Center for Arts and Creativity. I spoke with Brandon Patrick George about his 2020 debut solo album, and I'm so pleased to speak with him again on Zoom about his second solo recording, TWOFOLD. Hi, Brandon. Thank you so much for speaking with me.
Hi, Suzanne. Thank you for having me.
So congratulations on TWOFOLD. That was released in September 2023.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And before we talk about TWOFOLD specifically, we did chat a couple of years ago when you had just released your first album, and life was at that point just beginning to return to normal post-pandemic, or whatever the new normal is. So what's been going on in your life otherwise since we last spoke?
That's a great question. It was a crazy time last time we spoke. And since then, I've been very fortunate because despite all of the postponed concerts in 2020 and into 2021, I didn't really have any that were flat out canceled, which was really great. They were just rescheduled, but that did mean that 21-22 season and 22-23 would be really, really busy because I would have to make up the postponed concerts in addition to what was already being scheduled for those years. So it was a very, very busy few years playing catch up with all those concerts and getting used to traveling again and being in different cities because I was at home for a year and a half with nowhere to go.
Right. A lot of practice time.
A lot of practice time. It's bittersweet in a way. It was such a terrible, terrible time, and there was so much happening in the world. That was very terrifying, but I also was able to stay home and get a lot of practice in, which is something that I don't really have the chance to do being on the road hundreds of days out of the year.
Right. And you also made time to make your second album, TWOFOLD. Your first album was all music for flute alone, and so is this one, and yet it's called TWOFOLD. So let's talk about that. Why are both of your first two solo recordings for solo flute music, flute alone? What's special? What speaks to you about this particular repertoire, and why are you so committed to sharing it?
Yeah, well, the first album did have works for piano, for flute and piano. We did have Prokofiev and things like
that's
that.
True, yes.
But of course, we had the solo partita by J.S. Bach, which is a piece that I'm extremely passionate about and that has lived with me, since I was a young boy playing the flute. But I was particularly drawn to this repertoire on TWOFOLD because, as you said, I was coming out of a time when I was by myself and playing a lot of solo music. That's really what I did for a year and a half. And so the C.P.E. Bach Sonata was one that I had loved for many years and had really been, it was sort of like comfort food in a way to have that during lockdown. But it also gave me the opportunity to explore new works that had just been written and some that had never been recorded. And little by little, I started to find connections between these composers and this repertoire and decided that I would create an album of pairings. And, pairings, when you think of pairings, it sort of sounds like a tasting menu at a restaurant. And so I opted not to call the album Pairings, but TWOFOLD, because I mostly inspired by C.P.E. Bach and Saad Haddad's Tasso 1, which is based on this C.P.E. Bach. And this connection between these two composers and their music and the responses that composers have to earlier music. And so that's how we arrived at the title Twofold.
Yeah. Will you talk specifically about that piece, how it is connected to the C.P.E. Bach Sonata?
Yeah, so Saad actually took the opening of the sonata by C.P.E. Bach as a launching point for his piece. So there's actually thematic material that he's drawing on. But Saad is an amazing composer in that he is very interested in exploring Middle Eastern sounds and techniques through his classical composition writing, and how that manifests itself is through the use of quarter tones and what I like to call the notes in between the notes that we don't really have in our traditional major and minor scales in Western classical music. This, the music from the Eastern tradition is so rich and the harmonies are far more complex than the ones that we're accustomed to. And so he incorporates a lot of these techniques into this piece, but you hear direct quotations of the C.P.E. Bach in his work, and it's really, really special that I get to bring that to audiences, both Saad's unique voice, but also how he takes material hundreds of years old, centuries ago, and finds a way to make it his own. And so he's sort of like connecting with C.P.E. Bach through this piece.
Mm-hmm. And you've done that with the other music on this as well. You've got this interplay, as you say, between European, Hindustani, Japanese musical traditions, and that's with pieces like the Sarangs by Claude Debussy and Takemitsu's Air and that sort of thing. So again, what is your intention with this, and more importantly, how are people responding to those juxtapositions? Are they understanding what your intent is?
Yeah, I think for me, it's really important as an artist to make a case for composers who are alive and well and writing music today. I think that is so important that we understand that classical music is not necessarily a museum piece and something that just lives in a nice display case and never changes, but that it's a living, breathing art form that is continuing to grow and to evolve. And for me, I like to pair the traditional classical works with new compositions because I feel an obligation as a performer to the composers who are writing today to help advocate for their music and to help it find a place in our repertoire today. I think that that's so important. And for me, life is far more interesting playing music of today and sharing their unique voices. What I find from audiences, I performed this program for the first time. I performed the entire album for my Lincoln Center debut in May. And I was struck by the comments from people afterwards and how they really could hear the connection between the composers, their compositional styles, the harmonic language. And I think for me, it seems that when you present music in this way, it actually helps audiences make the connection orally, and it doesn't seem so strange, the contemporary sounds, when you take something like Debussy, which is so well known, but then you immediately place Takemitsu's Air, which the harmonic language is quite similar. It's written it's a longer composition, but the writing is so lyrical and the harmonies are quite similar. And so it helps people to be able to make those connections when you present music in this way, I think.
Mm-hmm. And I think you've really tapped into something important, and that is audiences seem to receive what we present to them. And so if you make a big deal or make a distinction between, okay, this is familiar or this is whatever, and this is a little harder or a little unfamiliar or a little, a little more challenging, that's what they're going to receive. That's the lens they're going to look at it, or that's the filter they're going to hear it. Whereas if you present it and just say, oh, look at the similarity, it's kind of like people, right? Like if you present people like, we're really different, then people see the differences. When you say, you know what, we're actually more the same than different, then that's what people see. So I find it really fascinating that you've paired this, and it's like it's just happened rather organically.
It did happen organically. These are composers whom I love. Reena Esmail is one that I'm a huge fan of her work, and I've gotten to know her over the years. And I love what she does in her writing, and just to be able to share that with listeners and say, hey, what she's doing now with bringing the Hindustani tradition of classical music to her writing is not that different than what Takemitsu did in the 20th century, particularly with his final work, Air. It's all the same. And I think by putting together an album in this way, the larger message is to get everyone to think about how much we are alike and how we are connected to one another, and how connected composers are today to the music of 300 years ago, and that will continue hopefully forever.
Yeah. Now, you've included Ruth Crawford Seeger's Diaphonic Suite from 1930. And I remember the last time we spoke that you told me that you have kind of a special place in your heart for Ruth Crawford Seeger. And would you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. You have a good memory, Suzanne. Yes, and actually when we spoke last time, I think I was diving into the book on Ruth Crawford Seeger by Judith Tick, which is really fabulous. I highly recommend it to people. Ruth Crawford Seeger was from Ohio, just like me. She was born in Ohio, trained in the Midwest, just as I did. And I was really fascinated with her story, being someone from Ohio, someone growing up in the Midwest, and learning more about her. I had played her chamber music, so particularly her Suite for Wind Quintet with Imani Winds, for many years. And I was delighted to discover that she wrote this little work for flute. And now it's little in terms of minutes. It's not super long, but it packs a punch. It's 5 minutes, but it's a beautiful, beautiful virtuosic composition. And I was really fascinated with her story because she was someone who was she did well in her day. She was a Guggenheim Fellow. She traveled the world. Her music was getting played. She got good reviews, but unfortunately, like so many women of the time, her career took the back seat to family life and to the work that she did with her husband. Her family life, she married into a family where there were already children, and she became the stepmother to Pete Seeger, a legendary folk singer. And she really became well known for her work with her husband, documenting American folk music for the Smithsonian, and also for the publication of children's books. A lot of folk songs that children still learn today in primary school are because of the work that she did to publish those books and to document American folk music. So I was really moved by her story because she was someone who was so fascinating, but died so young. She was only in her 50s. She had cancer, unfortunately. And so we don't have a lot of music by her, but what we have is just absolutely incredible. And so anytime I have the opportunity to talk about Ruth Crawford Seeger and to share her story and to bring her music to audiences, it just really gives me a lot of joy, because it makes me feel like despite her career being cut short, that there's a lot to tell there, and she was a deep and profound musician. It's just a real honor to tell her story and to share her stunning music with audiences.
Yeah, yeah. Let's talk about the Shawn Okpebholo piece on a painting by Henry Ossawa Tanner, "The Thankful Poor," and it's about it's about a dialogue between a boy and his grandfather that's depicted in the painting. Would you talk about that piece and maybe also your relationship with the composer?
Sure, sure. So I decided to pair Shawn with Ruth Crawford Seeger because they're two composers about 100 years apart, living in Chicago and writing what is we would essentially call a musical dialogue for solo flute, which I just thought was really, really incredible. So I decided to pair those two composers together. Shawn is a brilliant, brilliant composer who has written quite a bit of music for the flute, and actually has a larger work for quintet coming out that I'll have the opportunity to premiere at the Kennedy Center in the spring. This work on a painting by Henry Ossawa Tanner, "The Thankful Poor," is a gorgeous painting that depicts a young grandchild at a table with the grandfather. They don't have a lot of food on the table. It's sort of impressionist style painting in the sense that the facial expressions and the features aren't distinct. You can't really make them out. But the heads are kind of bowed at the table, and you sense that they're praying, that they're giving gratitude for what they have. And even though it doesn't seem like they have much, I like to imagine that in this conversation between this child and the elder grandfather, that there's not only a prayer of thanks for the relationship that they have, and for their families, but for the stories that they're able to pass down. I think back to my childhood and the moments I spent with my grandmother alone at the kitchen table, and those stories that she passed on to me about family that I would never know because they passed away before I was born, and really giving me a sense of identity and lineage and understanding where I come from. And that was so beautiful. And I think I was just as grateful for the food on the table, the delicious meals that she prepared for me. And I was probably even more so grateful for those stories that she shared with me. Shawn takes the solo flute and uses this instrument as a way to depict this conversation in this painting. It starts off as a very soulful lyrical work. It's very haunting in a way. It stays mostly in the low register of the flute for a good minute or so. It doesn't really get active for a while. And then in the middle, it's actually quite lively. You get the sense that maybe there's even a disagreement between the grandfather and the grandchild. And when I look back on my childhood, I wasn't necessarily the best kid all the time. So there were some lively dialogues between my grandmother and myself. And so that's kind of reflected in the middle of the work. It gets very, very lively and animated and very virtuosic. Lots of passage work, a lot of notes for the flutist to play. But then it returns to this soulful prayer-like quality at the end. And I just think it's really special to bring this to audiences and to bring Shawn's incredible work to the stage and to recordings, because he's doing such amazing things, and to just be able to pair these two Chicago composers, Ruth Crawford Seeger and Shawn Okpebholo, together, was just really, really cool.
Yeah. So I have to ask you, because it's a flutist thing, and I'm a flutist as well. So I know that you play a pretty special historic instrument, a powell, and I think you had a second instrument as well. But what else? What are you playing now? What instrument or instruments are you playing now?
Yes. So when I made this recording, I was playing on a silver Muramatsu flute that I've had for a good about 10 years now. It's a really fabulous instrument that and actually Muramatsu just celebrated 100 years of making fabulous flutes, which is really, really exciting. And it's an instrument that is just, it has a beautiful, beautiful sound. And it's really, really a tough flute in that it's durable. Like it's one that I can put on and off of planes every week and put it through the TSA machines in the airport, and it stays very, the mechanism is very strong. So I love that about this flute. So that's the flute that I used to make the recording on. And then about a month or two after this album, Twofold, I acquired another Muramatsu flute, a 14 karat gold Muramatsu flute that I am playing now, and that has become my main flute that I tour with and even record with now.
Wow. Was this something that was custom made for you?
This flute came to into my hands because I reached out to Muramatsu to ask them. I was searching, as musicians do, as one
flutists
changes
do.
and grows, you try to find new things. And I have a very strong relationship with the wonderful team of Muramatsu America, based just outside of Detroit. And I reached out to them and said, I love this silver Muramatsu, but I think I'm looking for something a little different. And they said, well, we just ordered a 14 karat gold flute that we're planning to show at the National Flute Association convention. It's brand new. No one's ever played it. We special ordered it. It's a real beauty. And if you're interested, we can send it to you to try before the convention. And I said, sure, send it to me. So I got it in the mail. I took it out of the plastic. I tried it for a few days. I called Muramatsu and said, if this flute goes to the National Flute Association convention, it's going with me because I'm going to be the one who's playing it now because I love it so much.
Wow.
And so I purchased it. And it's a really special flute. It's really, really beautiful. I got really lucky. So sorry, NFA, but I'm glad it's mine now.
Sorry, the rest of the flute world. But, and it's so interesting to hear you talk about it. And, obviously a fine instrument is an important tool. But it's really the player that makes the difference, Brandon. So it's a beautiful sounding instrument in your hands.
I'm not super, super picky when it comes to things. I think the Muramatsu flute is just a very, very well-made instrument that just does have the capability in the right hands to produce such a beautiful, beautiful sound. And I like that. I like that it's just very, very well made, and just it allows me to do what I want to do. As you said, it's the musician behind the instrument that really is doing something. And I feel like it gives me the freedom to just say what I want to say musically through what I call this amplifier of my voice.
Yeah. So what's next? What are you going to say with your voice? What are you planning for your next recording?
I have another recording that will be out later next year that focuses on romantic music this time, works by Schubert, Reinecke, as well as Lily Boulanger, and also William Grant Still, who, even though was writing in the early 20th century, wrote in a very romantic style, very gorgeous music. And that was a recording that I did with the fabulous pianist Brian Waghorn of the Metropolitan Opera. And that recording will be the first one with my gold Muramatsu, and it will be out later next year. So that's what I'm doing recording-wise. Performance-wise, I have a huge concerto project that I'm doing right now, where I am commissioning a series of new flute concertos, but not just for flute and orchestra. They are for flute, orchestra, and student chamber music ensemble. I am teaming up with orchestras across the country thanks to the support of the Ford Foundation, where I am commissioning new works for communities across the country, where I'll get to go mentor young people and have them perform with their local symphony orchestra. It's
Oh,
really, really important to me that I use my voice for good and for change. And I think music has the ability to bring people together. It has the ability to uplift communities and to inspire young people. And I think orchestras have a really unique opportunity to do all of those things in addition to the commissioning of new work, which I think, as I said before, classical music is a living, breathing art form. And so to be able to team up with orchestras across the country, to work with young students, to help orchestras center community in their programming and reach new audiences is so important to me. And so that is what I will be doing for the next few years. And the first performance will happen in June of next year. I've commissioned a new concerto by the fabulous composer Michael Gilbertson, who's based in San Francisco. He was a Pulitzer Prize finalist. And this work will be for the Albany Symphony Orchestra, led by the fabulous David Allen Miller. And we will be joined by the Albany High School Chorus. So it is for flute, orchestra, and chorus, this new concerto. And I am so excited for that premiere in June.
okay, I know what our next conversation is going to be about. You gave me goosebumps. I'm so proud of you. I'm so excited. I'm so impressed.
Oh, thank
This is
you.
brilliant. This is wonderful. So, yes, we will have to talk about that in advance of the premiere in June with Albany. Um, Wonderful.
Thank you, Suzanne.
I have been speaking with Grammy nominated flute player Brandon Patrick George about Twofold, his second solo recording, which was released in September 2023. And we will be talking again. It is just such a pleasure always to speak with you. Thank you.
Likewise, Suzanne. Thank you.